weeks, and we have Dr. John in the studio from Creation Ministries International. Good afternoon, Dr. John.
Good afternoon, Mick.
Great to have you back again, and we've had some interesting news this week, Dr. John. One story that I found, it says, and it's all about evolution, by the way, so, you know, I hope you're ready for it. Humans keep growing an extra artery in their arms, and this is why. And you go on to read the story, and they talk about evolution.
Yeah, well, there you go. No, they don't keep growing an extra artery, because I think, according to that story, it's one that is present in the developing child, but regresses and disappears in a lot of adults. But I think you read out to me that 100 or 200 years ago, it was commonly present in about 10% of adults, and now is present in about 30% of adults. And they're claiming that's evolution.
So how do you see it? It's the other way around.
Well, no. The genetic information is there for the artery, but what they haven't said is what groups of people are increasing in population. Because if, for example, it was present in the groups that are now showing large increases in population, and that's definitely not the Western world. In the Western world, we are going backwards. And, of course, in China, they had the one-child policy for a long time. So they haven't specified the ethnic groups. And if those particular groups that had the artery are the ones that are increasing, then obviously it will the prevalence will increase.
Yeah. I was also thinking, you know, if the genetic code's already there for an artery to be there, and it's with all of us as children anyway, maybe there's also genetic code that tells it to go away at a certain period, and those people are simply losing information to say it's meant to go away at this time.
Well, that may be true too, but I mean, in some people, there are differences, for example, in the blood circulation in infants in the womb and after they're born. And certain arteries do have to shut off and regress because the circulation changes when you start breathing air. And in some people that doesn't happen. You know, there's a little communication channel in some of your great vessels just outside your heart. And in most people that's supposed to shut off, but sometimes it doesn't.
So that's a problem?
Yeah, it's called a patent ductus, you know. So it doesn't help you in your say adult. It doesn't help you in your out of the womb circulation, but of course it's essential in the womb.
So but it's not evolution in any way.
It's not evolution, you know. It just doesn't shut off in some people. Yeah, no. There's really not much evidence around, you know, for evolution. I mean, we talked last week about that common diagram that you see of the supposed human evolution, with the dark-skinned monkey on one side and the light-skinned on the other. And we talked about how really when the fossils are examined, they're either ape or human, and there's no missing link. And of course, when you think about it, all that is ever found are a few bones or skulls, you know. But what you see in magazines or in books is really just an artist's conception of what they think the missing link might have looked like. And it really is amazing what artists can do to make a monkey more, or a chimp or whatever, more human-like.
Yeah.
I mean, when you think of the Planet of the Apes movies, for example, I mean those gorillas riding horses, they looked pretty human-like, didn't they?
Yes, yes.
And one of the things that we find, of course, is that artists can do all sorts of things, particularly with eyes, to make the animal look more human.
Yes.
If I look in your eyes, what I can see the the black dot in the middle, which is your pupil, and I can see the coloured bit around it, which is your iris, and the white of your eyes, which is the sclera. Now, humans have white sclera, but apes don't. They have brown sclerae. So what the artist does is when he draws he paints it white, and so it looks very, very human. And there's lots of differences in eye gaze and eye movements between apes and humans, and really the artist or the movie maker can make animals look very, very human just by doing a few things with their eyes.
Yeah, it's remarkable how this missing link that we've always heard there's a missing link, but the number of pictures and the number of stories we have on the missing link that's still missing, mind you, is incredible. It's almost as though someone's found it. But unfortunately, it's still missing. It is 22 minutes past 4. We'll be back with Dr. John very soon. If you have any questions, please send them through 0401 949 949. That's our text line, 0401 949. Creation Ministries International. And this is his second week back after a hiatus of some time. It's great to have you back again, Dr. John. And, of course, it's great to hear about the, well, we've talked a lot about the missing link the last couple of weeks. And we've also talked a teensy bit about, well, I mean, over the last few years, we've talked about carbon dating. And I did throw a question at you a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, well, that's right, Mick. And of course, this is the problem that evolution has got. You know, it's got a problem with time. Now, we don't believe it wouldn't matter how much time you had. You know, the mechanisms for evolution, like mutations and natural selection, are just not going to do it anyway, because the progress is backwards rather than upwards and forwards. Yeah. But really, they just don't have the time, because as most students of the Bible will acknowledge, the Bible tells us that there's only about 6,000 years of creation and human history. That's what it says. Now, a lot of people have tried to explain that away, but nobody ever denies that that's what the Bible says. And if you're a Bible believer, as we are at Creation Ministries, then we accept that that's all the time there is. Now, of course, humanity, a lot of people have tried to dispute that, particularly even in the early days of evolution, because Charles Darwin was given a book to take with him on his voyage by one of the early, I suppose we'd now call them geologists, and he disputed the biblical time frame, as did quite a few. They didn't have any evidence for it, but they did dispute it. And of course, Darwin read that book while he was away, and he had his ideas about evolution developing, and that gave him a bit of an idea of a longer time. And so he was able to formulate the ideas of evolution. But really, there's never been any absolute evidence to justify the extra time. And that's why I wanted to talk about carbon dating in the session when we come back after the news.
All righty. Well, it's 29 minutes past 4. Send us your questions, 0401 949 949, particularly now. If you have any questions about carbon dating or any dating, 0401 949 949. We have Dr. John in the studio. He'll be answering your questions. Send them through to our text line, 0401 949 949. Now, Dr. John, we get headlines during the week like, are we alone in the universe? Work begins in Western Australia on the world's most powerful radio telescopes, which are going to allow astronomers to peek billions of years back into the cosmic dawn. And, of course, we all know that the billions of years are just something that someone's thought up. But when it comes to real scientific dating, the one that everybody thinks about is carbon dating. And they go, oh, it must be right.
Yeah, well, look, that's true, Mick. I mean, people, of course, have tried to find some scientific method of dating things because with Darwin in the beginning, all of this idea of long ages was just speculation. They didn't have any evidential stuff to look at to prove that or demonstrate that there might have been more years than what the Bible allows for. And radioactivity, of course, was only discovered in the early part of the 20th century. But when Libby came up with the idea of carbon dating back in the 1950s, this was hailed as really the answer. Now we know that we've got some scientific method that will tell us how old things are. Now, of course, because the things that you want to try and get the age of have to have carbon in them, then it's really only organic things like bones or timber or something like that that you can use carbon dating on, something organic. But the principle of it was absolutely fantastic. What he decided was that if we think about the respiratory cycle for plants and animals, our atmosphere is composed of nitrogen and oxygen and water vapour and a little bit of carbon dioxide. And animals, of course, breathe in oxygen and they expire carbon dioxide. And plants do the reverse. They take in carbon dioxide and breathe out oxygen. So this is the respiratory cycle that we believe God devised for Earth and all of creation. Of course, the evolutionists believe that it evolved, but there it is. That is the respiratory cycle. Now, we do happen to have, now that radioactivity's been discovered, we do know that there is a radioactive element of carbon called carbon-14. Now, there's not much of it, and it's actually produced from nitrogen because cosmic rays strike the Earth's atmosphere and they convert a nitrogen-14 atom into a carbon-14 atom by getting rid of a proton and replacing it with a neutron. And it then behaves like carbon, and it can combine with oxygen to form radioactive carbon dioxide, and plants and animals then use, the animals breathe that out once they've got it in, and the plants take it in, and so on. And over time, equilibrium is reached, and you can pick that there would be a ratio of radioactive carbon to normal carbon. And any animal or plant that's alive at that time will also reach equilibrium with its surroundings, so it's got the same ratio of radioactive carbon to normal carbon in it. But of course, when it dies, it stops breathing and stops metabolizing, so it doesn't take in any more. And the radioactive carbon that is in it then begins to decay. And we know that there's a fixed decay rate for this radioactive carbon. And when you're talking about decay rates for radioactive elements, what you talk about is a half-life. That is, the original quantity becomes half after a fixed time, and then a quarter after the same time, and then an eighth, and then a 16th, and so on. And of course, because that's an exponential type decay, after about 10 or 12 half-lives, then it's virtually undetectable. So the maximum lifespan or the maximum time that you can use for carbon dating is about 10 to 12 half-lives. So we're looking at about 70,000 years, not millions. So carbon dating only goes as far as about 70,000 years, even if those years actually existed, which of course at Creation Ministries we don't believe they did. But anyway, Libby came up with this idea, and it really was fantastic. And because you can measure the ratio of radioactive carbon to normal carbon in the sample. Mm-hmm. And we can measure in our atmosphere now the ratio of radioactive carbon to normal carbon, but we can't actually go back in time to measure the ratio that it was when that plant or animal was alive, yes, because you can't go back in time. You have to assume that it's the same as it is now. Mm. And is that a valid assumption? Well, of course, we would say, no, it's not a valid assumption. And if it was less than it is now, then that would reduce the result you get from carbon so-called dating. Mm. And there's every reason to believe that it probably was very much less. The reason for that is that the Earth is protected by a magnetic field, mm-hmm, and that magnetic field deflects cosmic radiation, which is the main source of production of carbon-14. Mm-hmm. So it protects the Earth by deflecting it away, and the stronger the magnetic field, the more deflection away. Mm-hmm. But scientists have been able to measure the Earth's magnetic field for about the last 200 years. And what they've observed is that over that 200 years, it's declined by about 15%. Wow. Now, that's a pretty big decline in only 200 years, which means it's 15% less strong now than it was 200 years ago. Mm-hmm. And who knows how much less strong it was back, several thousand years ago. We just don't know. Yeah. But probably it was considerably stronger then. Mm. That means that the amount of carbon-14 being formed then would be much less than is being formed now.
Which makes things look older the further back you go.
That's right. Mm. And there's another factor as well. Bear in mind that Libby put forward his theory back in the 1950s, mm-hmm, and at that time we were able to measure the ratio in a sample and the ratio in the atmosphere at that time. But there had been a considerable amount of increase in radiation throughout the Earth by the 1950s. I mean, we had all the testing for the atomic bombs, and a couple of very dirty bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and who knows what influence they had on the production of more carbon-14.
You say that we've lost 15% of the magnetic field around the Earth as well.
The strength of it has declined by about 15% since it was first measured about 200 years ago.
And that can be scientifically proven?
Well, they are the measurements, yes.
Wow. Yeah. So, I mean, it's fairly obvious that carbon dating doesn't have that perfect half-life that we were talking about.
Well, it depends how old the sample is. I mean, it's probably not too bad for things that are perhaps only a few hundred years old. Mm. I mean, our instruments are pretty sensitive, and you can probably get reasonably accurate for relatively recent times. Mm. But when you start saying, well, this thing looks like it's 40,000 years old, well, it could only be 4. It's not really accurate the longer you go back in time. Mm. And there are some other very, very interesting things as well. One of the things that you can say is you can't say exactly how old a thing is by carbon dating because of the assumptions that you actually have to make. But there is one thing that you can state absolutely definitely, and that is that if there is any carbon-14 in a sample, then it's less than 70,000 years old, even if those years existed. Yep. Now, one of the very interesting observations concerns some of the things that are believed to be very old. One example would be coal. Now, coal is pretty much pure carbon. You know, the remains of plant material, and coal is generally believed to be in the 100 million or thereabouts years old, maybe even more.
Mm-hmm.
Interestingly enough, every sample of coal that has been sent for carbon dating has got some radioactive carbon in it. Now, what does that mean?
Yeah.
It means it's not 100 million years old.
So they're out by thousands of percent.
I mean, it's an absolute impossibility. Now, another piece of material that is pure carbon is diamond. Now, diamond is believed to be maybe even 1 billion years old, and yet even diamond is shown to have radioactive carbon in it. But the clincher, Mick, and this one is really the best of all, dinosaur samples.
Mm-hmm.
Dinosaur samples also contain radioactive carbon.
They're meant to be millions of years
and
old.
they're meant to be 65 million years old. So that really throws a little bit of a spanner in the works of the age of dinosaur fossils.
Absolutely.
So a lot of those things, I mean, carbon dating is or the presence of radioactive carbon is a friend to the creationists, definitely not an enemy.
Yes. We had a question come through, Dr. John. Do you know how the reduction of the magnetic field affects the climate?
The answer to that is no, I don't. But I'm sure it does.
Yep.
I mean, we don't know why the Earth's magnetic field is declining. And, we've mentioned on this program before the shifts in the magnetic poles.
Yep.
You know, things are happening in our Earth.
Yep.
Our Earth is, like everything else, is deteriorating. We're deteriorating. Earth is deteriorating. The sun is burning itself up. You know, the stars are breaking up. You know, there's all of these sorts of things going on. Everything is going downhill.
Well, the Bible does say the earth has a limited time. So
yeah, absolutely it does.
So we're only going in the way the Bible points, I guess.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yes. Well, thank you again, Dr. John. We've come to the end of another awesome. And Dr. John in the studio, of course, we have to let those timed events come through. That's actually a traffic report comes from another studio, and they literally send it to us within seconds of us getting it. So it's as up to date as possible. So we've got to let them go. Thank you for allowing that, Dr. John.
No, that's okay, Mick. We were in the middle of a pretty interesting discussion, of course, and
yes.
We've been talking about carbon dating and the limitations of it, and how you have to make assumptions. This is the same with all of the scientific dating systems. You've got to make assumptions, and those assumptions are either very, very unlikely or unprovable. But look, it really is an interesting thing, Mick. As we mentioned then, everything is going downhill. Nothing gets any better. It's all consistent with what we believe about the deterioration of humanity. Things go backwards, not forwards, and so evolution really is an impossibility. And the truth is, no scientific method of dating has ever actually disproven what the Bible's time frame is. Okay, they get results that are way out, but the assumptions are so either improbable or unprovable that nothing has ever really disproved what the Bible's time frame is.
Absolutely. Now, we also got another question, Dr. John. I don't know if we've got time this week or if it'll have to go to next time. They say the Australian Aborigines have been here 40,000 years. Why don't they have a written language, never use metal and the wheel? That comes from one of our very good friends, Perry. Interesting questions.
Obviously, that, Mick, is a sensitive issue, but it's something that really we probably do have to address, because 40 or 50,000 years is a lot greater than the Bible's time frame of only 6,000, and it also because we know that the Bible tells us that all ethnic groups on earth are descended from the survivors of the flood. There's nobody who's not. Then a lot of what is believed about Aboriginal history does go against the Bible. So we'll might carefully have a look at that next week.
All right. Just interestingly, you say a lot of what goes against Aboriginal history. However, there's a bunch of Aboriginal groups, I believe, that got together to put that giant cross in the middle of Australia, and that's up now.
Yeah,
it's there, and there's a lot of Aboriginal groups that are praising God, praising Jesus, our Creator, for everything He's done, and put that cross up there to say, hey, we believe something different.
Yeah, well, that's right, Mick. And anyway, we'll talk about it next week.
Sounds awesome. You're on 94.9. We've got Worship Mob coming up next. This is Arrested by Grace. Then we'll have the news and weather. Thank you, Doc.